Hello everybody and welcome to my monthly reading wrap up for the month of October. I read 10 books in the month of October, which basically means this is probably my most successful reading month since I got back into reading about a year and a half ago. Granted, 3 of these are graphic novels, but 10 books in total is so good for me, and I'm just really excited to talk to you about all of them. So for the month of October, I really wanted to read more like spooky, I'm gonna say like Halloween themed books, because yes, some of these are horror, but like some of them are just kind of like lightly spooky or cute spooky, and I just really wanted to do that. I did have a pretty hefty like TBR, which I don't even normally make TBRs for months anymore, but I had like 14 or 15 books that I really wanted to read, and I ended up only reading 10, but you know what? We'll save them. We're good. So let's jump into the 10 books that I read this month. Okay. The first book is technically not a like horror book or a spooky book. This is just something that I had started reading in September and it rolled into October. I started the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Y'all know, I loved ACOTAR. It was one of my favorite books series that I have read so far. And so I'm in the Maasverse. I'm ready to keep it moving. So I started Throne of Glass, which is the first book in the Throne of Glass series. Now there is Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel. I have heard so many conflicting viewpoints on how to read these books, okay? Because at some point there's a tandem read. You read the prequel but in between like 3 and 4, I don't know. I followed this TikTok. I'll try and find it and link it below for you. I think it's called The Romantic Way to Read Throne of Glass, so I'm just following that reading order. So I just started with the first book, which is Throne of Glass. So we start this series with fantasy names. They're difficult. I'm gonna say her name's Selena. You follow Selena. She is in this like really intense like high security prison because she is an assassin, and she is there, and she like immediately upon like the first 10 pages is being released by this prince who wants to use her as his champion, because his father, who is the king of their land, throws this almost like Hunger Games-esque style championship between a bunch of people, and a bunch of people choose their champions, and whoever wins becomes the king's champion and gets to serve under the king and live in the palace and, you know, the Throne of Glass and all of that. So Selena was chosen by the prince. I feel like she was chosen kind of almost sarcastically in a way, but she ends up, because she's this really well-known assassin, becomes really amazing at this. So you sort of follow this kind of Hunger Games style championship while also discovering secrets about the castle and secrets about, you know, this Throne of Glass and secrets about the king. And you're following like not multiple storylines, but it is essentially multiple storylines, and it's kind of really fun. I really did enjoy this. I think fantasy is very difficult when you start a brand new series, especially for me. I feel like it's hard for me to sort of jump right in and immediately be enthralled with a series, but I did really like this. I thought this was a great first book. I liked the Hunger Games-esque, I keep saying that, but it was like the Hunger Games-esque aspect of it, because I felt like that was really interesting to see the other champions and see what sort of trials they had to go through. And then of course the sort of side quests is what I'm gonna call them, are very fun. And then of course a love triangle. I love a good love triangle. So I did enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this series, but so far so good. Okay, so the next book I read, I'm actually gonna combine the next book I read with the last book I read for the month, because technically I read them out of order and technically they're in the same series, but I read Garlic and the Witch and Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson. I read Garlic and the Witch first, and I thought this was the first one. Read Garlic and the Vampire first. So I read them completely out of order, but I loved these. These are 2 graphic novels. I'm not sure if they're considered, I would say they're probably considered middle grade, but I did read Garlic and the Witch first by myself, and then I thought this would be perfect to read to my 8-year-old, so we read this together. She wanted to be Garlic. It's very fun to read like that, and she loved it. The end of this is extra cute, and she really loved the ending, and I was like, well, I'm glad you like that, because we accidentally read the second one first. So then we read Garlic and the Vampire. So I don't recommend reading them out of order, but these are 2 extra cute graphic novels about a little bulb of garlic who goes on these little adventures, and it's just really cute. It gives you like all the feels. It's a very sweet, short, quick read, and I do recommend if you have kiddos around to read them with them. I think they'll really enjoy them. Like I said, me and my 8-year-old, we read it together and she really loved them. So we read both of these this month and they were super cute. I believe I gave both of them 5 stars because like how could I not? They're freaking adorable. All right, so now we're getting into the more horror slash spooky books. The first one I read is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. This has been on my radar for a couple of years now. I have not seen anybody in BookTube talking about it, and that is because I read the first part or 2 parts of this on Reddit years ago. So I think it was either the No Sleep subreddit or like Creepypasta subreddit. The first 2 parts of this book were in there, and I read them a couple of years ago, like I said, and became entranced. I was like, this is so crazy, so spooky, so scary. I need to read more. And then I put this on my Amazon wish list then and just never purchased it for like a year and a half. Finally purchased it, finally read it this month, and it was okay. I ended up giving it 3 stars. The first part of this book, first 2 parts of this book are genuinely very, very scary. And I feel like if it was the first time that I picked this book up and I read those first 2 parts and then continued and obviously finished the book, I think I would have liked it a little bit more. But because I had already read those 2 parts, I already knew what was coming. I was more anticipating that 3rd part, that final part, to see the ending, and the ending really didn't just do it for me. So Stolen Tongues is about this couple. Their names are Faye and Felix. It's written like this is his story, and they go up to this cabin that her parents own, and they don't really vacation there or anything. It's just like in a really snowy, beautiful area, and it's very isolated, and the woods are a little creepy, and at night they hear voices calling to them that sound like their family members, sound like people they know. It's a very Skinwalker type story. It's very scary, and then like it becomes more tangible. Things actually start physically trying to attack them. They leave, they go back to their home, and the things have followed them home. And then it's like a bunch of back and forth. Like Felix is trying to figure out what's going on, and Faye seems to be like talking to those creatures in her sleep. It's very scary the first time you read it. So I will say, if you go into this and you haven't read it years and years ago like I did, I think you would think it's a lot scarier than I did. It's written really easily to read. And I just think, I just wish, I don't know, I wish I would have read it all in one go, but I was a little bit disappointed in myself because I felt like the ending really didn't hold up to how spooky, how scary the initial build-up was. But Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell, 3 stars. I feel like I almost want to save this book to the end, but I'm going to talk about it because it's the next one I read. This is probably the best book that I read this month. I easily could have given this 5 stars. It's one of my favorite horror reads I've ever read, and it is Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. I believe this is S.A. Barnes' debut, and there's also another book coming out, I think either next year or the year after, that's kind of along the same realm as this. I loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars, 4.75. I knocked it down 0.25, and I'll explain why. So Dead Silence is sci-fi horror, cosmic horror. It's everything. It was so good. So if you've ever seen the movie Ghost Ship, it's essentially Ghost Ship but like in space. It's so creepy, so scary. It's about this small, so this is kind of set really far in the future where like space exploration, we're just out there, we're all hanging out there, no one really is on Earth, everyone's just kind of in space. So there's this small like little cruiser who's just like doing a job, and they get a distress signal from a ship that they're like, wait a minute, that ship went missing years ago, and the ship that went missing was this massive cruise liner, think like the Titanic, and it was like the first of its kind going out into space, and it was like a cruise, like it was a massive ship, a lot of famous people were on it, a lot of like millionaires and billionaires, and it just went missing in space years and years ago, and they're getting this like old distress signal from it, and this crew is like a crew of I think like 10, like there's 10 people, and they kind of go back and forth like, should we go check it out? Like if we get on that ship and we even get like a piece of it, like a faucet, and we take it home, we could be making millions of dollars, because like it went missing, and it's huge to know that like those people are still there, or they're not, who knows. And so they eventually go check it out, and it's really scary and really spooky and really awesome. And the reason I knocked it down is because it was building, like everything was getting scary and spooky and awesome, and then the author just kind of like cut it, stop, we're gonna go back a little bit and then come back. And I was really, I got what the author was doing with that, because you kind of knew what, I feel like I'm talking in circles, but like I don't like to spoil things. I feel like you knew this was going to happen, this abrupt pause from the beginning because of how it was written, but I was still really sad because I really wanted it to keep getting scarier and scarier and scarier. And it does eventually get back to that point, but it was awesome. This book, if I could recommend any book that I read this month to you, it's this one. I would have given it 5 stars if not for the abrupt stop. This book was so good. Next, I wanted to try my hand at a short story collection. So I have At Home with the Horrors. This is a short story collection all by Sammy Scott. I ended up giving this 3 stars because not all of these were scary. Like, none of them, in my opinion. I think maybe like one kind of was like, oh, that's a little spooky. These just like weren't so scary to me, and I'm a little bit sad about it. So if you really enjoy Black Mirror, I think this short story collection especially is for you. It's a lot of short stories about like that I would expect to see a Black Mirror episode about, and to be quite honest with you, a couple of these were actually really, really sad. Like there was one, I think the one that so it's the second story called Teresa. It is so incredibly sad, and I feel like I almost put myself in the character's shoes and I wanted to cry while reading it. But basically it was a story about how this man and wife, the guy works in like an office cubicle and ends up becoming a victim of a mass shooting, and he's on the phone with his wife while it's happening, and obviously like it's a huge deal, crazy, scary, so sad. And then the next day she gets a call from him at the exact same time, and he's like, hey babe, how's it going? And she's like, huh? And then she has to relive that moment every single day at the exact same time, and she tries to change it somehow, but she can never really get past it. And then at one point she does kind of change it. It's hard to explain, but it just made me so sad while reading it. I think out of all of these, my personal favorite was probably Peeping Tommy, because that one was like the only one that really gave me like a chill down my spine, I guess. It was like very creepy. But yeah, these gave me very Black Mirror vibes. I don't think this is necessarily the type of horror I really personally enjoy that really gets me. It was a good read. It was fun. Obviously, short stories are very fun in the sense you can read like a bunch in one go and then be like, okay, I did that. So I gave this 3 stars overall. All right, next I have my book of the month for the month of October. If you are not signed up for book of the month, you absolutely should be. I'll put my referral link down below, and I will also put the coupon code. If you put that code in, I think you get your first book this month for $9.99, a hardcover for $9.99. Kind of a steal. So this was my October pick. It's Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. This was like a gothic romance, I would say, or I think it was titled as gothic fiction, but to me this was like a gothic romance. I ended up giving this 3 stars. This was really lovely and really sweet, and I feel like if I had read this book at a different time when I was in a different reading mood, I would have maybe given it a half a star or a star more, but I just wasn't like really in the mood for this. It was a very short book. I think it's less than 300 pages. And it's very beautiful, but I just was really looking for spooky, and I thought maybe this would be that, and it wasn't, and that's okay. But this is still a really great book. This book is about Opal, who lives in this very like small town, and she's kind of an outcast. She's just trying to scrape by and take care of her brother, and she's really trying to put money away for her brother to go to this like prestigious school. And there's this Starling House in the neighborhood that everybody kind of keeps away from. Nobody really knows who's living there. The Starlings are very elusive, no, it just, you know, things like that. One night she's walking home from work and she sees one of the Starling boys outside, and she comes up to the gates, I think, to talk to him, and he just like tells her to run, and so she does, and ends up coming back the next day and getting a job there as a house cleaner. It's hard to explain, but essentially she starts fixing up this Starling house, realizing this house is very mystical, very magical, and the house really likes her, and so does the boy, and it ends up becoming sort of a fantasy romance. I would say there's a lot of fantasy elements to it because there's a reason that he kind of is trying to take care of the house, and the house needs to be taken care of in order for the rest of the town to kind of move along, and there's certain reasons for that because there's certain creatures. It's a whole big story. I think that it was hard for me to get into. Once again, I think the fantasy thing sort of is difficult for me to get into, but once I finally understood what was happening and I understood like the process, it made sense. So I ended up giving this 3 stars, and 3 stars is not a bad rating by any sense of the imagination, but I think that's probably my best overall rating for this because this was beautiful and lovely, but just not necessarily for me. Next I have my next graphic novel, which was Sheets. I believe Sheets is a trilogy. I picked this up because this is by Brenna Thumler. I picked this up because it's gorgeous. Like seriously, this like graphic novel is the pastels. It's so pretty, and I felt like this made sense for like Halloween October. I ended up giving this 4 stars. This book was so sad. It's about this little boy ghost, and he comes into the human world and he meets this girl. He meets Marjorie, and she's 13 years old and she is going through some traumatic stuff, and it's really, really sad, and him being there really like helps her. And she runs this kind of dry clean laundry place by herself because her mom passed away and her dad's like in a really depressive state because of it, and she's also trying to take care of her brother. And this ghost sheep boy is very helpful to her, and I feel like this is a perfect kind of easy middle grade read. This isn't one I'm going to read with my 8-year-old quite yet. I think I am going to wait till she's like middle school to let her read this because it's just like really sad. But I ended up giving it 4 stars because it's really cute. Ugh, I feel like saying sad and cute in the same sentence is so strange. It is really cute. It was very beautiful. I loved the illustrations, are just absolutely fantastic. I loved the story, and I'll continue it. I think the next book is called Delicates, and I'm gonna pick that up. But yeah, I ended up giving this 4 stars. It's really cute, and it's very like teenager melodrama, but also actual trauma and sad, but cute. Sheets. All right, the next and the last sort of like horror book I read this month was Old Country by Matt Query and Harrison Query? I'm not quite sure. I was so excited for this book. The premise of this book is so awesome, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. I would say like 3.5 because I felt like I was kind of dragging my feet through this. But this is really good. This is a really good book. So this is about Harry and Sasha and their golden retriever Dash. She's like a main character. They buy this house in rural Idaho in like the middle of nowhere. I think their closest neighbor is like 1.5 miles away, and they're so excited because they just want to kind of like not necessarily get off the grid, but live off the grid, you know, kind of live in their own kind of area, grow their own vegetables, just kind of be by themselves sort of situation. So they want to buy this house in a place where there's like really not a lot of people. So they purchase this house here in the Old Country. And the day they move in, their neighbors who live 1 mile away come over and are like, hey, we don't want to come off crazy or weird, but like, please take this binder of information about this land and like read over it carefully, because there is a spirit that lives on this land, and every single season will do something creepy and crazy to try and hurt you. And they're like, oh, what? You're crazy. But it's real. There is a spirit that manifests itself in different ways between each different season, and each season it gets creepier and creepier. And yeah, the premise of that is really cool and awesome. And it's funny because you start off in springtime, and the springtime spirit is supposed to be like the easiest to manage, but I personally felt like the springtime spirit was the creepiest because like that's when you kind of first meet the spirit. Actually, that might be a lie. I think autumn was actually really scary. But like you see like a light in the lake, just like a light shining in the middle of the lake, and if you don't light a fire within like 5 minutes of seeing the light, you'll hear drumming, and once you hear drumming, you better close every single window and door and lock yourself in your house because that thing is going to get you. And that's kind of scary, very ominous, very spooky. In the summertime, there's this thing called like the bear chase, where there's like a naked man running through the woods, but he's running at a very like jogging type speed, and there's a massive grizzly bear chasing him who's also running at a very like jogging kind of speed, like a not natural kind of fast run. And you have to make sure you kill the man, because if you don't kill the man, the bear will kill it immediately in front of you, and like that's just kind of it. Like the man can't touch you. That was pretty scary, but like not super spooky. But then autumn, I'll let y'all read for autumn because autumn was real spooky. But yeah, so you kind of go through each season with this couple and experience the spirit, and they're just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. They're like, how can we stop this? I don't understand. Like, this is scary. I want to live here, but I want to live here peacefully. Like, I came here to live a peaceful life, and I live in the Old Country now, and the spirit that manifests itself in creepy ways is trying to keep its land. So that's basically the gist of this book, and I felt like the ending... that's the thing with horror books, is I just want the ending to go wild. Like, I just want it to be crazy. Like, I want the scary thing to win, because in my realistic brain, I think the scary thing will always win, you know what I'm saying? So the fact that, like, not all the times the scary thing wins, or the way it's defeated is not, like, it just doesn't make any sense, always bothers me. But I liked this overall. I thought it was a good read. It was a good time. Kind of a slower pace, but I didn't mind it because I do like that sort of ominous, creeping up on you sort of feeling. But yeah, I did end up giving it 3 stars. I think 3.5 is probably where I'll go with that one. And then the last book that I read in October is my sort of like, I really wanted to read this one in October, and it was kind of like my finale to my spooky books, even though this wasn't spooky. My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. This is a debut novel. I purchased it mostly because of the cover. I pre-ordered it actually, which is kind of funny because it's a debut novel, but the cover is so cute. And I ended up really loving this. I ended up giving it a 4-star, and I think the reason I loved it so much is because I had just gone through reading a bunch of like horror scary books, and this was just kind of like a breath of fresh air, and I really needed it. It's about Cassie and Frederick. Cassie is very like loving, sunshine, bright character, and she sees like a Craigslist ad for an apartment in Chicago for like a roommate for $200, and she's like, that's a steal, you don't understand. And she goes to check it out, and like the apartment is gorgeous, and she's like, $200, are you sure? And she meets Frederick, who is the guy who is renting it out, and he's very like old school, but he's like, I'd say 30ish, very old school, talks really weird, dresses really weird, and she's like, something's off about him, but $200, you can't pass that up. That's kind of a steal because she's a struggling artist. She moves in. Obviously he turns out to be a vampire, and there ends up being like a little romance, and it's very cute, and I really liked it because I felt like Frederick was very just endearing. He was very sweet. He just like wanted to know more, and he never once seemed like scary or spooky, but he just seemed very just like quiet and reserved, but also very kind. And I don't know what like about that I just really loved, but I just really loved it. And like I said, I think it was just a breath of fresh air for me at the time because I would just read all of these like spooky books, and I needed this, and I really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 stars, and I do recommend it. It is very cute and very sweet. Those are all of the books that I read in October, and I'm so stoked about it, honestly. Every time I finished a book, I was so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading so much. And it was just a really great reading month for me, and I want to keep it up with all the spooky books in October next year, and also throughout the year, because I do just love a good horror novel. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you're not already, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye guys.